Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm excited for today's episode today. I've got a lot of big ideas I want to talk about and share. Today's episode I'm calling, Can I Become God? Is That Heresy? And not just me, can you become God? It seems to me that there is a level of appreciation for the mystical reality of Christianity that has been lost in the West, and not entirely, but just most of us, when we're taught Christianity, this element isn't involved. And so as I began to learn about it, I found it particularly intriguing, and just thought, not enough people, I think, have an understanding of this idea, and the more I understand it, the more it seems to be kind of the crux of the whole ordeal. And it is the idea of divinization or deification, and it is the idea of the process of Christians not becoming God as in becoming a God, but becoming so unified with God that we hold his divinity within us, which is a really interesting idea. And I think to start to dive in to understand that idea, one of the viewers in my last video made a recommendation of a definition to review, which I do think would be very helpful. And it's just the Catholic definition of reality, which is that which exists objectively and independently of the mind, as opposed to the unreal, which is merely subjective or fanciful. And reality is that which the mind conforms, or that with which the mind conforms when it possesses the truth. And so when we think of Christ as the way, the truth, and the life, we start to come to this understanding that to pursue Christ, or God, the Trinity, is really to search for reality, and a reality beyond what we can see around us, but kind of that mystical, metaphysical reality. What is the nature of what it is that is beyond what we can see? Because we know it's there. That concept of God that we talked about, that there is something behind the material. There is some form of force that is holding everything together, and there is some level of activity in dimensions we can't access and see. And I wanted to share from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, section 460, which relates to this idea of deification, just to show that this is the teaching of the Church, even though we maybe don't hear about it so much in mystical terms. It says, "The Word became flesh to make us partakers of the divine nature. For this is why the Word became man, and the Son of God became the Son of Man, so that man, by entering into communion with the Word, and thus receiving divine sonship, might become a son of God. For the Son of God became man so that we might become God. The only begotten Son of God, wanting to make us sharers in his divinity, assumed our nature so that he, made man, might make men gods." And this might be kind of a wild idea to a lot of people who've never heard this, never been taught this, it hasn't occurred to them. So I wanted to kind of dive into, what does this actually mean? Like, on a practical level, what does this deification process look like? So I've got it broken down into two parts where, from what I can tell, the Christian view of man is that we are both a soul and a body. And that's why, we have the whole Catholic theology of the body, because we're not just souls, we have a body. So the first part I'd like to talk about is the physical. how are we physically deified? Can our bodies be substituted with divinity so that we become more and more in union with God? And really, this is kind of the whole theology of the Catholic Church behind the Eucharist. And I know maybe not everyone who's watching this is Catholic, but it is the Catholic teaching that the Eucharist and our communion is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. And, I'm not going to get into all the details behind that, but if that seems like a long shot to you, there are actually documented, scientifically investigated Eucharistic miracles that show where there have been communion hosts, the Eucharist, that have started to physically transform into flesh, and they've done all these scientific studies on them, showing that they're actually the heart tissue of a heart that is suffering. So, if that holds true for every Eucharist, then when Catholics consume the Eucharist at Mass, they are consuming the flesh of the heart of our Lord. And when you consume something, it doesn't just go through your system, it replaces, the cellular material in what you eat gets broken down and built into your cells. So kind of a wild idea is that as we consume the Eucharist, that we are actually divinizing our bodies, that we are taking that divine flesh and incorporating it into our own bodies. And I will link in the description of the video a link to Ray at Joy of the Faith. He's done lots of work investigating these Eucharistic miracles, and he's actually working on making a major motion picture, so I'll also link his crowdfunding site where he's trying to raise some money so that he can make a movie that's going to be professionally animated and shown in theaters, actually, to kind of spread the word and show people that the Catholic Eucharist is actually the suffering heart of Christ, and that's not something that should be overlooked. So that's kind of, the first category that I was thinking of is, so we are physically divinized or deified through the Mass and partaking in the Eucharist in a mystical way. There is something, it's not just any flesh, it's God. So as we eat God, God is incorporated into our bodies. And then the second aspect would be the spiritual. And for that, I kind of want to go back to the analogy that I spoke about in a previous video, where St. Teresa of Avila describes how our bodies are like diamonds and God is in the center. And we have to really clean off all of the unnecessary aspects of our own humanity and self-will that would impede God resting in the center from shining through. And so, some people will say, well, what does that look like? How do you actually do that? How do you spiritually come into greater union with Christ? And the first part of that is detachment. So there's detachment from sin, detachment from vice, and then there's also detachment from the material. We live in such a culture of materialism, and even us practicing Catholics it's so easy in today's culture to fall into the vice of idolizing our belongings and obsessing over them almost. So, we cannot come into union with God in our souls while we are hanging on to the material, because God is immaterial, and so that attachment to this world ties us down from finding that union. Another thing that we have to find detachment from is spiritual and emotional consolation. which, could be the affections of others, praise, even any sort of mystical experiences found in prayer. We cannot have attachment to those. We cannot seek after those. When we are seeking God in prayer, it has to be purely out of love and devotion to God, not out of trying to gain anything for ourselves or have some kind of cool experience. And then finally, but probably most importantly, humility. You won't be able to access God in your soul if you don't find humility. And humility is often, I think, defined incorrectly. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. And that comes with that whole idea of detachment. Not only are you detaching from everything around you, the people, the things, the emotions, your senses, but also detaching from yourself and being so focused on God that literally everything else falls away, and that's all that there is. So people might hear this and wonder, is this too much to ask? Is this an unbearable ask? Why would anyone in their right mind put themselves through all of this? And to that, I would say from experience in prayer that if you get one incidence of experiencing mystically the reality of the presence of God and his divine love, there's nothing that you wouldn't be willing to give up to find unity with that. And I'm not by any means a mystic. I would never claim to be. I just feel I've had enough limited experience with these sorts of things in prayer to start to understand, and I want to share that with everyone because I feel it's not adequately explained well enough, often enough, and I really want to share this idea because it's something that's so crucial to Christianity, that once you find how to access the mystical reality of God, if you can pursue that union with him so that, there is a stage at which his presence and what you are become so intertwined that you almost aren't anymore. It's, how St. Paul says, I believe it's in Galatians, I think I have it written down here, Galatians 2:20, how he says, it's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And this really speaks to that mystical union where the self is so annihilated that basically you just become a vessel for the divinity of God to shine through. And there's a quote from St. Augustine related to this concept that I think is really enlightening. He says, in the end, there will be one Christ loving himself. And I think that's such a beautiful idea, and it goes such along with this idea of divinization and becoming so mystically unified with Christ that it's not you anymore, it is Christ. And, kind of an idea that occurred to me, because I've also been reading, I love St. John of the Cross, and he is the doctor of mysticism, and so he talks about this mystical union ad nauseum. And, kind of the idea that we can do this now while we're on earth, and granted, not everyone gets there clearly, but option 2, if you want to end up in heaven, is to do it in purgatory. So I think it's important to emphasize this so that we can all be pursuing this now, because no one really wants to go to purgatory. So yeah, lots of ideas there. I think that my next couple of videos, I'd like to really dive into some of the ideas of St. Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross, about prayer and this mystical experience and what that consists of, and like practically what the stages and levels are of that. So yeah, I hope you all are enjoying my content. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up, a like. Please share it with any friends, and please subscribe. Thanks.